And welcome to Real People with Stan Simpson, a program about Connecticut people and compelling issues. Make it a point to drop in every Sunday morning at 10:30. Jeff Grant, folks, led a life of greed and arrogance as a successful New York lawyer, but it all caught up with him more than a decade ago. An opioid drug addiction contributed to him doing the unthinkable with funds earmarked for clients. He served 14 months in federal prison for scamming the government. Today, he's a reverend, focused on his faith and counseling other white-collar offenders like himself make this complicated transition from prison. It's a return visit. We had him on 2 years ago. I thought it was a fascinating story. We had very little time. I said, man, we got to get this guy back. I think we had like 4 minutes with you, and I thought the story was so fascinating. We didn't really do it justice, but welcome back.
Thanks, Stan. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, so folks who don't know you, you had it all. You had it going on for a while there. You were a successful lawyer up in New York. You had an office in Mamaroneck. Mm-hmm. You were living high, you were living good, right?
Big time.
Big living. Mm-hmm. So, but you also get caught up, you had an opioid addiction.
I did.
You had an issue with greed and avarice, right? And so it was a bad combination. You wanted to live large, and then it kind of compounded itself, and you got yourself in a bunch of trouble.
Yeah, I think that I was self-medicating for bipolar disorder, mm-hmm. which I suffered my whole life, under control now. But then I was doing anything I could pretty much to just stop the noise in my head. And in 1992, I had a sports injury. I ruptured my Achilles tendon while I was playing basketball. And post-surgery, I got addicted to opioids. And I had doctor friends who were more than happy to give me pretty much as many as I wanted.
You needed.
And that lasted 10 years. And during that 10 years, it was a long, slow slide down into drug addiction and oblivion and ignoring my responsibilities, ignoring my law firm.
And you ended up, to make the story short, you ended up taking some clients' funds that were set aside, but you went to prison for applying fraudulently for some 9/11 funds. That time 9/11 had happened, and they were giving out special loans to businesses that were impacted by the terrorist attacks.
Exactly.
You applied for that fraudulently. You didn't need it, but got the money, and they found that what you applied for wasn't quite true. So that's what you got arrested for. But you also were kind of sliding hard. You were doing other things that you didn't go to jail for. So that was just what they, pinched you for, right?
Yeah. Well, what happened was that post 9/11, there were ads on the radio and on TV for businesses that were adversely affected by 9/11.
Right.
And I called them up and I told them my situation because I was in Westchester County. They told me that I would qualify for the loan.
Right.
But I was just so drug-addled and out of my mind.
You kind of doctored up the application when things weren't true.
I said things that weren't true.
Yeah.
And I didn't need to because I would have gotten the loan anyway.
Right.
But I was just out of my mind. And then in July of 2002, I resigned my law license and I tried to kill myself through
in 2002?
Yeah, through an overdose of the opioids.
So you had hit bottom at that point.
Rock bottom.
So what degree, when people hear the opioid use, we know drug addiction can be devastating, right? Mm-hmm. To what degree did you have a character flaw and the drugs just simply brought that out? Or to what degree, if you had to do a pie chart, to what degree was it because you were addicted to drugs? And what degree was it because you had a character flaw and the drugs just brought out that character flaw?
What a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. I think that I grew up, like a lot of guys who commit white-collar crimes, I think I grew up with a lack of character. Mm-hmm. What the Italians call, they call it mal educato, poorly bred. Mm. And although I grew up in the suburbs and we had all the trappings, I just did not grow up with the kind of character that was necessary to.
Grew up kind of spoiled? Is that what I'm hearing?
I would say that's right. Okay. Absolutely. Okay. And when the rubber hit the road, my character wasn't there, and I made a lot of wrong decisions.
Right.
And this was the biggest.
This is a big one. So you go to prison. You're up in Allentown, PA.
Allenwood.
Allen Wood, PA, which before was sort of a lower security prison. But when you got there, they flipped the script and they made it a much more higher security. So you were doing some hard times, so to speak.
Well, the camp had closed,
right.
but I didn't know that.
Camp, right.
The camp had closed.
It was famous as being a prison camp.
It was Club Fed.
Until you got there. They said
and it closed a year before I got there, but
Yeah.
I didn't know. When I got the letter, I went to the internet to see where I was
Yeah.
going, and I realized that I'm not going to a camp.
So no more golf and jacuzzi and all that stuff over there. It's going to be a real prison, right?
No, I got bars and controlled movements, and it was real prison. Yeah.
So what was that like? Because we laugh, but I mean, I'm sure it was horrifying for you, for a guy who grew up in well-to-do, successful lawyer. Now you're behind bars. Folks tell you what to do, when to eat, when to go to the bathroom. What is that like?
It was horrifying, but it was also what I needed. You know, I needed to wipe the smirk off my face, and
You'd be humbled. You'd be humbled.
Yeah, be humbled. And by that point, I had been in recovery for 4 years. By the time I reported to prison, and I'd learned a lot about humility and about service to others. But what I expected to be the worst experience of my life. And it was a terrible experience,
right.
But it wound up to be an experience that straightened me out and taught me about God and service and respect in ways I'd never learned before.
You know, I mentioned this last time, Nelson Mandela, the great Mandela, in his book and in person, I had a chance to interview him years ago, long story, but he said prison was actually something that he thought was a positive for him because it gave him the opportunity to think. He had, for the first time alone, and it gave him the opportunity to think. And for people who don't know, Mandela wasn't always this choir boy that people made him out to in the end.
Absolutely.
I mean, he was a rabble-rouser. He had done some things that he was not very proud of. So he said it gave him time to think. I was reading, I think, one of your materials. You said it gave you the chance to think also. That the three things you can control was your mind, your attitude, and how you help others. So talk about the solitude of prison and how you made that work for you.
Well, I don't know if it was solitude because there were a lot of people around. I was in a barrack of 180 guys, and there was always something to do.
Right.
In terms of looking over my shoulder and being careful, but it was a reflective time. It was kind of
a lot of downtime though too, right?
A lot of downtime.
Right.
People ask what prison's really like, and it's boring. It's nothing like you see on TV. Mostly it's doing a lot of reading and a lot of, in my case, I walked 14,000 laps around the track.
Right.
And
about 10 miles a day, right?
10 miles a day.
Right.
Yep. I walked vicariously from New York to Los Angeles and tracked every 10 miles.
That's how you keep your mind. You kept mapping where you're going. 10 miles, I'm here in this state, in that state. So you kept your mind active by saying, okay, I'm in this state here. And you lost 60 pounds too, right?
You're
a big guy now, but you were a much bigger guy, right?
The anxiety and the drugs had definitely beefed me up pretty well.
Yeah.
But while I'm walking the track, word got around that I had been a lawyer.
Right.
And I hadn't been a criminal lawyer, but I was a business lawyer.
They must have loved that then, right? You're a prison lawyer. You became a prison lawyer, it sounds like.
Well, what happened was I learned that people in prison have problems like anybody else. They have bankruptcies and divorces, and they have real estate problems, and their partners on the outside are stealing their property from them, and all kinds of stuff going on. And it was a blessing to be able to talk to them and help them through some of their problems. Not professionally, and I certainly never took anything in exchange for anything, but just to talk. And
you felt you were serving. You felt
I was being of service, and I came to God in a big way in prison, and that led me out to wind up going to seminary when I came out. Because you know my story. I went to Union Theological Seminary, and I got my Master's of Divinity, and that was a direct result of
full transformation, right? From the guy who was the crooked lawyer to the guy who became a man of the cloth.
Yeah, and although you'd be shocked that a lot of the skill sets are the same.
How so?
Because we're helping people with their problems. The motivation is different, but the motivation is different. You know, mostly when I was a lawyer, I was helping people get out of their problems so that they can go screw people again.
Right.
And here I'm actually trying to help people build better, more ethical, purposeful lives. And to the extent that I can help them
through your own experience,
through my own experience, then I have some street cred on it.
Right.
So it seems to work out pretty well.
It'll help you to heal as well, right? By you sharing your story, you're helping someone else to get their life on track, but you're also able to use your bad experience in a positive way. So I'm assuming that was part of your healing process, rehabilitation process, right?
Well, it's all self-reflective.
Right.
And I learned so much about myself and what my motivations were and my early childhood traumas.
What do you trace it to? What do you think? Why was that kid so spoiled and so entitled? And what do you trace your downfall to, besides the opioids?
Well, it was my responsibility. I did it. So
Right.
I'm not. But I grew up on Long Island in the '60s, and there was a culture there of people who had moved out there from Brooklyn, and they were, in essence, avoiding the issues of World War II, and it was freewheeling, and it was hipster swinging time.
No real consequences for anything, right?
And my parents were not around,
Right.
and so we, my brother, my sister, and I, we had to raise ourselves, and we weren't. That was true of pretty much every house on every street in Long Island at that time. It was an adultless society in many ways.
Right. So you left to your own devices.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
All
and
right.
we did the best we could.
Yeah. All right. We're going to come back and continue the conversation with Jeff Grant, a former New York City lawyer. He lost his license more than 10 years ago. He was convicted of scamming the federal government for a fraudulent loan. Today, he's a reverend and a co-founder of a growing reentry organization that we're going to talk about more in the next segment. He's focused on his faith and counseling other white-collar offenders like him to make the complicated transition from prison. Stick around. You're watching Real People with Stan Simpson.